Welcome to Forward, brought to you by LinkedIn Talent Solutions. I'm Guy Raz, your host. During the course of recording hundreds of podcast episodes, such as How I Built This, and my many years as a radio journalist and television correspondent, interviewing thousands of people, there's one thing that still excites me: hearing how really smart people face enormous challenges head on and come up with creative solutions. And it's why I'm so excited to see so many of you joining us today for a jam-packed hour of insights and conversation about the challenges and opportunities facing HR right now. So let's get into it. Seismic shifts are happening in the world of work everywhere. And everywhere, people are stopping to reevaluate what they want out of work and life. As a result, people are changing jobs at a record pace. Today, we're going to examine what all of this means. We'll hear real stories from companies and HR leaders working to build a more flexible, empathetic, and equitable future of work. What we're experiencing right now has been described as the big quit or the great resignation. On LinkedIn, it's often referred to as the great reshuffle. People are no longer just asking what they want to do for a living. They now want to know why they're doing it. They want to feel good about how they're spending their days, and they want to do it as their whole, authentic selves. If we recognize what employees want, we can start to understand how to better engage and retain them, how to build a people-first future of work that includes a stronger culture, opportunities to develop skills, and a more flexible and inclusive workplace. From these changes come great opportunities. If we're smart, we can create a future of work where we trust employees to determine for themselves how, where, and when work gets done. So today, we're going to look forward to a future of work where people come first. You'll hear from HR experts and executives from a variety of industries, including Deloitte, Mailchimp, Pfizer, Unilever, Vice Media, Rolls-Royce, and more. Also joining us are leaders from LinkedIn, including Chief Economist Karen Kimbrough and Chief People Officer Twyla Hansen. We, of course, also want to include the most important voices, yours, so please add your comments, questions, and reactions to the chat. However, we are also asking that you don't record any of the content or take photographs, including screenshots of today's program. We're going to cover a lot of topics, but they boil down to two main ones: strengthening company culture and building skills for the future. We'll also hear how important it is that diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging be a part of every conversation. That's a lot, which is why I want to get right into it.
The world of work is in disruption. What employees want and need has changed a lot. Employee happiness is down, burnout is up. Globally, 41% of employees considered leaving their job in the last year. Workers who believe their skills aren't put to good use are 10 times more likely to look for a new job, and are twice as selective about the job they apply to next. But what if this disruption is actually our chance to build a new future of work where people come first? A workplace where people feel cared for, invested in, and see a path to grow with you, where everyone has the opportunity to reach their full potential. It's time for talent leaders to come together, work across functions, and create a future of work where people come first. Let's go forward together.
I want to welcome one of the most sought-after experts on the Great Reshuffle, LinkedIn Chief Economist Karen Kimbrough, joining us from their office in San Francisco. Karen, welcome.
Hi there.
Karen, as an economist, you obviously analyze data on how global trends play out with employees and for companies. You have access to this tremendous database that is actually unique to LinkedIn, and you also speak with business leaders from around the world. So as you sift through the signals, What are you hearing? What are people telling you about the Great Reshuffle?
Well, the Great Reshuffle is really this unprecedented moment of change in the global workforce. And it's caused employers and employees alike to kind of reconsider how they operate together. And so that's changed everything from how we work to why we work to where we work. And if you think about it, these changes are probably going to be with us for some time. So for example, remote work, really took off. We had maybe 1 in every 67 jobs as a remote job on our platform pre-pandemic, and now it's 1 in 6. And if we think about where we work, we saw this huge increase in job transition. So our members moving around, taking new roles, even getting promoted at a faster pace. And then, of course, there's why we work. A lot of folks reconsidering what's going to draw them into the office, what really they're looking for. And a lot of that boils down to kind of flexibility and work-life balance.
Karen, can you give us some insights into how different groups are rethinking how and why they work? For instance, somebody who might be a caregiver might think differently about work than, say, a member of Gen Z.
Oh, absolutely. We know that from now until about 2030, we're going to see more and more of Gen Z moving into the workforce. Maybe as much as a third of the workforce will be Gen Z. And what's really driving them is they're looking for opportunities that align with their values. So that idea of purpose and mission really speak to them. But of course, they're also career driven, just like the rest of us, and they're hoping to have opportunities for internal mobility and advancement. So these are things that are extremely important to Gen Z. But at the same time, you mentioned, Guy, caregivers. Caregivers, often women, for example, are really looking for flexibility. We know from our surveys of members that over half of them are, had to leave or are thinking of leaving the work just to kind of achieve that flexibility that is so sought after right now.
Karen, can you tell us how the Great Reshuffle is playing out, perhaps differently, around the world?
It's an interesting question. The Great Reshuffle is definitely a global phenomenon. I would say it's predominantly expressing itself in the US, where it's strongest, but we're seeing it also in the UK and in Germany. So ultimately, these transitions are happening worldwide.
Karen, lots of HR experts and leaders from around the world are tuning in. What advice would you give them as they now look ahead to this future and begin to navigate through all of this change?
Yeah, the Great Reshuffle is going to be with us for a while, Guy. And I think my advice would be maybe 1, invest in the skills of your talent. That's definitely something that we would all as workers appreciate. And then maybe 2, create those opportunities for internal mobility where people can kind of feel they have all the variety and flexibility and excitement without actually having to leave the company that they're in right now. So those are the 2 that I would probably most highlight. And I would say we know already that with the speed of digital transformation that's happening, between now and say 2025, you're going to need at least 3 more skills on average for every job in order just to kind of keep pace. So it's ultimately really important to have that investment in skills.
Karen, thank you.
And if I were maybe Guy to sum, sure, no. I was going to add on one thing if I can, Guy, real quick. I was going to just say, if I could sum it all up, I would say to all of you watching, take this moment to think about how we can transform the world of work to make it more equitable, maybe more dynamic, and ultimately more fulfilling for all of us. And I'm super excited that we're here at Forward starting that conversation together. So thank you.
Thank you for adding that, Karen, and thank you so much. Creating a future of work where people come before profits is a lofty goal. So how do we get there? There's no one template, which is why we've asked thought leaders and HR executives from around the world to share their experience, insights, and roadmaps for their vision of a better future of work. In the first of 2 idea exchanges, we discuss culture, why reconsidering company culture is critical for employee recruitment, retention, and growth. It's also an opportunity to create a more inclusive and equitable workplace. For example, the data shows us that employees are twice as likely to recommend their employer if their needs for flexibility are being met. You can download your own copy of the Global Talent Trends Report using this QR code or by clicking on the link in the chat. To dig deeper into culture, let's go to the idea exchange. Our moderator is a psychologist and an expert on how people build grit, Angela Duckworth. Angela welcomes Jen Fisher, Chief Wellbeing Officer at Deloitte, Crystal Gaskin, Chief People and Culture Officer at Mailchimp, and Lars Schmidt, founder of Amplify and a frequent speaker on modernizing HR practices.
Welcome. Thank you for joining us. And I want to thank Crystal from Mailchimp, Jen from Deloitte, and Lars from Amplify. We're going to talk about the bar for company culture. It's rising. The question is why? Among the many reasons, employees are burnt out, work-life balance continues to be out of whack. Clearly, we're a long way from equitable workplaces. And the result is that people are reevaluating everything about work: when they work, how they work, and maybe most important, why they work. So the way we work has to change, or employees will find what they need elsewhere. Jen, I want to begin with you. We've been talking about employee burnout for 2 years. It hasn't improved, and that tells us that work isn't working for people. What, in your opinion, do we need to do differently?
Employee burnout started and existed long before the pandemic. I think the pandemic exposed employee burnout and truly how bad it was. So I think that it also gave us the permission to talk about burnout, to talk about what we're going through, to talk about what we're feeling. And as we shift, some people going back to an office, hybrid, whatever is in between, I think we have a lot of things to figure out because we do know that it's not working. Rethinking things like, why do we meet? When do we meet? When do we come together in person? And what does that look like? What's the purpose of coming together in person? What type of work do we do when we're together versus when we aren't co-located or when we're apart? All of that needs to be rethought. But I think the key for every organization is you have to involve the workforce in these decisions. They are being loud and clear about that. They don't want these things to be decided without them or for them. And if you do decide without them and for them, and it's not something they agree with, we're seeing it happen, right? I mean, that's what the Great Resignation is all about. People are, they're leaving because they want to have a voice in the way that they work, and they want to work for organizations that care about them and care about what they think, care about who they are inside and outside of the workplace. And so I think, we've moved way beyond kind of work-life balance into how do we help people integrate the pieces of work and life that really matter to them. That also makes the workforce responsible for the company culture, right? It's not just set at the top, even though tone at the top and behavior at the top can either help reinforce culture or it can destroy it. But we all have a role to play when it comes to setting the culture that we want on our teams or within our larger organizations. And so I think it's important that people understand if you don't feel like you can affect big organizational culture, you can certainly affect your team culture, right? And we all have a role to play in that and how we treat each other, how we talk to one another, and the conversations that we have and the communications that we have with one another can, in a lot of ways, make or break, somebody's experience with an organization.
Lars, let me ask you this question. It has to do with employees increasingly valuing their time. Companies and even countries are testing the waters of a 4-day work week. I wonder, in your perspective, is this the next frontier for flex work? And if not, what is?
Yeah, Angela, I would say it's, part of what's so exciting about this time is there are so many frontiers. 4-day work week is certainly one of them. Jen touched on so many other points that I think are impacting the world of work today as we think about mental health and supporting employees and thinking about when, how, and where we work. So I think it's hard to pin down any one thing as being kind of the next frontier. And that's what makes this exciting and stressful at the same time. I think what we're going to see a lot of emphasis this year in particular, and likely next year as well, is what I frame as hybrid 2.0. In the early days of the pandemic, when many companies who were co-located shifted to remote, that happened overnight. And so essentially they ported their in-office operating rhythms, operating systems to digital. They still had, meetings that should have been emails. They still coordinated most of their work synchronously. They just did it digitally and synchronously. And so I think one of the next frontiers that you'll really see a lot of companies focus on is most companies who have quote unquote knowledge workers who are able to work remotely during the pandemic and continue to, they're hybrid by default, right? Offices will still exist. Some people will still be going back into an office, but most of those organizations are hybrid. And so we're going to get really intentional about hybrid, about being intentional about what work has to happen synchronously versus asynchronously. And so I think, this year and next the focus is going to be hybrid 2.0. We're definitely going to see more companies having 4-day work weeks. And I think that will continue to increase over the next couple of years. But again, we're not looking at any one thing. It's really a buffet of things that are changing in this new world of work.
Crystal, that brings me to a question that I've been wanting to ask you, which is about flexibility. It's clear employees want flexibility in where and when they work. That requires trust. How do you measure accountability and productivity without eroding trust? And are these at odds or not?
I love this question, Angela. And the first thing I'll say is productivity and accountability should never be at odds with trust. Because what we've learned by working virtually or in a hybrid environment in the past 2+ years is that in general, employee productivity has actually increased. And Jen mentioned this earlier, but prior to COVID-19, most tech cultures, including Mailchimp, were almost predominantly working from the office. And it was this primary belief that we could better manage accountability and productivity by visibly seeing the work in action. And while there is an undeniable benefit of improving communication, collaboration, and belonging, the key ingredient to improving all of the above, and honestly in any working environment, is trust. And to me, trust is really engendered when there is clarity of expectations, when the employees have the flexibility to do the work the way they need to. And I would say another key part is really the empathy and the benevolence from leadership to acknowledge that current events or balancing home or caregiving priorities may impact employee productivity, and trusting their employees to get the work done when they need to. And at Mailchimp, we're shifting from measuring outputs to measuring outcomes. And most companies have also moved toward quarterly check-ins or OKRs. This shift in mindset really requires building a new muscle, because we believe that with the help of leadership to connect to our teams, we need two-way communication about what's working and what's not, and giving new opportunities to adapt and check and adjust more frequently. To me, that builds trust. It improves communication, it improves team satisfaction, and ultimately productivity.
There would be then autonomy about how you're going to manage your time, your workflow, in order to achieve the objectives that everyone has agreed upon. So there's not going to be a kind of micromanagement, but the two-way trust that enables innovation and flexibility and so forth. Is that right?
That's absolutely correct. And again, it starts with the why. It starts with setting the context of what we're trying to achieve. And if the end result is really about customers, which it is for Mailchimp, we're giving our employees the flexibility and, to your point, the autonomy to manage the how the work gets done. But there's a common goal, there's a common mission on what it is we're trying to accomplish.
Jen, this brings me to a question that I think is all about, the two-way street of trust and clarity in an organization. And the question is, what can employees do to help create the culture they want to work in? Whose responsibility is it to help employees set boundaries, and how?
I want to say it's everyone's responsibility. The problem with saying that is when it's everyone's responsibility, it's nobody's responsibility. So let me break it down. So if you are on a team that you don't feel like has the culture that you want to work in, and you want to help change that, talk to your colleagues. Put together some ideas, bring it to your leader, and say, these are what we want our team cultural norms and behaviors to look like. This is what we want it to be. My colleague and I on Phillips, we wrote a book called Work Better Together. And in our research for that book, what we found is that oftentimes where the power lies in creating culture is actually at the team level. That's where people live and work every single day. Those are the people that impact our well-being, whether it's positively or negatively every single day. It's not typically the large organizational leadership that impacts us on a day-to-day basis. Large organizational culture is really important, but the culture that affects us and impacts us every single day is on our team. And so if you don't feel like you have the right culture, don't just leave it up to your leader or blame your leader. We just have to give ourselves the permission to help change and impact the cultures that we work in.
Lars, what does the ideal workplace of the future look like if really the microculture of a team, if you will, can be at least as important as the overall organizational culture of the entire company?
Yeah, I mean, when you look at the future workplace, this goes back to your question about frontiers. This is another frontier that we're in the process of building right now. You know, the majority of employees who have been working remotely want to stay working remotely at least part of the time. But I think when you look at how we need to be thinking about offices moving forward, it's much more of a communal space. It's a place where you go to build those relationships. It's a place where you go to collaborate, to communicate. You know, it's almost more of an index on that than actually doing work. When
working in our home offices, then the workplace does become, as you say, a place to develop relationships, a place to, talk to people in ways that you are not necessarily getting work done. And that insight leads me to a question for you, Crystal, which is about relationships and in particular about belonging. When it comes to belonging, it's pretty simple. Employees who feel a sense of belonging are much more likely to stay. Employees who don't feel a sense of belonging are much more likely to leave. How can we foster belonging at a time when employees, in many contexts, may not be interacting much with each other in person?
Yeah, well, this is a personal answer as well. You know, I'm one of 100 plus employees who joined Mailchimp virtually during the pandemic. I can personally attest at how critical it is to find community and foster belonging virtually. And you're correct. You know, employees who are less likely to feel like they belong are 50% more likely to leave the organization. And so belonging is such an important attribute for measuring employee engagement and retention. And the fascinating thing about it is that you really need data to understand the sentiment on a granular level to create impact, because belonging is very, very personal. And so in 2020, Mailchimp began attributing our employee engagement surveys and measuring belonging as a part of our culture index. And we learned that employees who, for example, worked outside of our Atlanta headquarters office were less likely to feel like they belonged. And so when I think about the employee experience holistically, it really starts with onboarding, right? It's true for all employees, regardless of your work preference, but especially when you're joining remotely or in a hybrid environment where half of your team is in a different location. And at Mailchimp, we have an amazing employee experience team that measures the employee experience through life cycle surveys, and we design experiences with employees' needs in mind. To Lars's point, we have to design a new work environment for people to feel like they belonged. So we created a plan, and we focused on 3 key areas. Number 1, building inclusive leadership, because the leader's mindset really needed to shift from how do you manage belonging in a very dynamic way with team members all over. The second is really partnering with our employee resource groups to understand the needs a bit more on a granular level, but also creating social connections with employees. And I would say the last thing we did was really, to Jen's point earlier, we have to establish new norms of what belonging means for the team. And you really want to co-create that with your team and not have a top-down approach.
This is the end of our conversation, but before you go, I have a question for each of you, and that is, we're seeing another round of back to the office announcements from companies. But we know most employees, as you point out, don't want to go back to pre-pandemic work life just exactly as it was. So the question is, what might be driving this push to return, and what's the merit and the risk? Are leaders trying to reuse a recipe for culture that has expired? And Crystal, I'd love to begin with you.
Well, I think the first part of the question is, I think we all in some ways want to feel some sense of normal, want to feel some sense of control based on what we've experienced the last 2+ years. And what I'll say to the reusing of the recipe is we have new ingredients. So leaders really need to think about what are the parameters we're working with now and recreate something completely different to meet the needs of the employee experience.
Terrific. Thank you so much. And Lars, what's your perspective?
Yeah, I love Crystal's comment on new ingredients. We're all nostalgic for a pre-pandemic world, but the reality is the world of work that existed in February of 2020 is gone forever. And so for leaders who are continuing to push to get back to that norms, they're going to feel a lot of pain as employees actually have lots of different choices now and options. And so I think eventually they're going to come around, but those who are really steadfast on pushing people back to the office before they're ready, they're going to be on the front lines of this great resignation.
And finally, Jen, what's your perspective on this question?
I think what we need to all ask ourselves is, what was it that we liked about going to the office pre-pandemic? And what are those things that we want to go back for? We want to remember it as great, but there are a lot of things that weren't so great. So let's let go of those things. Let's remember what we liked about it and why we liked it, and carry those forward along with all the new recipes that we've learned and that we have to make the world of work a much better place for all of us going forward.
Jen, Crystal, and Lars, the themes in this panel have been so powerful. I hear that, this isn't just the great resignation. It's not even just the great reshuffling. It's the great reflection about the principles of human nature that have brought us to workplaces in the first place, but also that there is this possibility for experimentation as we reflect on why we do our work and how we work best. There is the possibility, especially if everybody has the autonomy to do this, to in some ways reinvent work as we move out of the pandemic. So I want to thank each of you for your invaluable perspectives, and I hope to see you again soon.
I love what Crystal said about reusing the recipe with new ingredients to transform the employee experience. I'd like to invite Missy Haled into this conversation. Missy is the Senior Vice President of Global Talent and Culture at Aristocrat. It's a global gaming content and technology company headquartered in Sydney, Australia. She's joining us from their office in Las Vegas. Missy, welcome.
Thank you so much, Guy. It's a pleasure to be here today.
Missy, Angela and our other guests touched on what flexibility can do for employees. How are you thinking about flexible work at Aristocrat?
Last year we launched a flexible hybrid work model where employees have more choice about where, when, and how they work. And we've given them that opportunity to frequently review and adapt those arrangements as necessary. And we've been really intentional, like Angela said, around trust, and that looking to measure outputs and outcomes in lieu of outputs is really more important when we really look at productivity and accountability. But it's about creating that environment for employees where they can thrive.
Missy, we know how important it is for employees to feel a sense of belonging. We just heard about that, but we also know from LinkedIn's research that those feelings are significantly down globally. Can you give us a sense of what you are doing at Aristocrat to foster that sense of belonging?
Sure. Aristocrat is people first, and that is the lens that we look through in every decision and everything that we do. And it's top of mind for us. Belonging is so critically important, not only to retain our employees, but to really be engaging with our employees. And so we've done a number of belonging and D&I initiatives that have really sort of brought our employees into the fold, and we've been listening. We've hosted a virtual Aristocrat Together Summit, a D&I summit across the globe that brought all of our employees together. That was really powerful and impactful. We've also introduced an Aristocrat Families Hub, And that hub is a resource for parents, for carers, for all generations to go and be able to have things that at their fingertips that would really be helpful in these times. We've also expanded and invested more in our employee impact groups, recognizing that making sure that our underrepresented groups have a voice and can feel even more connected to the company. But I think the most important thing that we've done is we've trained and developed and equipped our managers to work in this new world. It's not easy being a manager of people, and in this world, like how and what works and what connects. So we've really spent and been very intentional about our investment in our managers.
Missy, as you know, there are a lot of HR folks and leaders watching this. What advice would you give to them about ways to build a stronger culture?
Listen to your employees, ask them what they need and want. It's becoming more and more personalized. So employees have choice. So make sure that you're connecting and asking, what do you need or want? Because what might resonate with me might not resonate with you. Focus on onboarding and the employee experience. Angela mentioned it, but I can't reinforce that enough. Get people connected to your company early on, make it sticky, do things that help them feel very connected. And the office plays a role in that. Maybe it's not full-time, maybe it's a day a week, 2 days a week, 1 day a month, but have some connection for collaboration, innovation, and building relationships. And then lastly, spend the time to develop and equip your managers. They are the ones that are leading in this new hybrid world of work, and we really want to ensure that they have what they need to really make those personal connections with employees. Employees stay because of their manager. We know that. And so that's just a significant investment that I think everyone should make.
Missy, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Guy.
As we talk about the employee experience, we thought it would be nice to hear directly about the experiences from a few of our LinkedIn members.
I spent 20 years at Domino's where the culture was amazing, but then I changed jobs and the new environment was just so toxic. I would walk into work and tell myself, one more day closer to retirement. Now as an owner of a CrossFit gym, I get to prioritize a positive culture, and your hour here is going to be the best hour of your day.
During the lockdown, when they shut down non-essential work, I couldn't see my psychologist in person. I noticed others needed help too, so I co-founded a startup focused on mental health. More young professionals want a safe space to talk to their bosses about burnout. They want an environment to live their best work life.
It's nice to hear what's important for Jeff and Sabrina. It reminds us that everything we're discussing today impacts individuals. We're very interested in hearing your perspective, your stories, questions, and experiences, and we'll dig into what you're posting in the chat in just a few minutes. One question that's come up is, what is LinkedIn doing? Are they following their own advice to innovate? Is there anything we can learn from their experience? Like so many other companies, LinkedIn was concerned about the toll that the pandemic was taking on its employees. Their response was Lift Up. It's a program that's been one of the biggest successes for LinkedIn's culture, as you'll hear from LinkedIn Vice President of Global Talent, Nina McQueen.
We know we needed to check in with our employees, so we asked one simple question: how are you? And from that, we had over 8,000 comments with themes around burnout, isolation and anxiety, dealing with family responsibilities, and also missing social interactions with their coworkers. That's when we introduced Lift Up, a series of initiatives to support employees and managers during this extended work from home period. It was our goal to help them lift their heads up, look to brighter days ahead, and have some fun along the way. And it was really important for us to support our managers because they're the ones who are critical to the company's success and have a direct impact on our employees' daily lives. You know, everybody deals with stress, but left unchecked, it leads to burnout. So one of the things we did was Rest Up Week, which was a company-wide shutdown. And employees loved it. It not only gave them a chance to rest, relax, and recharge, but they didn't come back to an avalanche of emails. We also introduced a monthly no meeting day, and we had half-day Fridays in July and August, a chance for employees to catch their breath. We know music connects us and lifts us up, so we hosted a music festival featuring our own employee talent. We hosted a fundraising event during the music festival, and we raised over $100,000 for the World Health Organization. So how can you help support employees? Maybe it just starts with simply asking the question, how are you?
I loved hearing how a simple question can start a chain reaction of events. That struck a chord with some of you as well. Pushkraj writes, job transition is a concern, and we need to handle it with sensitivity. Thanks. Anthony R. writes, people first, yes. And Leslie writes, culture eats strategy for breakfast by Peter Drucker. A famous quote from Peter Drucker. Thank you, Leslie, for that. Do you have a story to share? We're all at different points along our respective journeys. What's been your experience? Add to the conversation in our event feed. We've been discussing reinventing culture and how that can positively impact diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. We want to shift our focus to the future of skills and internal mobility. We know that companies that excel at internal mobility retain their employees twice as long as companies that struggle with it. That's a significant number and is just one of the many data insights from LinkedIn's latest Workplace Learning Report, which you can download now by scanning the QR code or by clicking the link in the chat. I want to welcome back Angela Duckworth and her guests for our next idea exchange, as she welcomes Sean Hudson, Head of Learning and Development at Pfizer, Daisy Auger-Dominguez, Chief People Officer of Vice Media, and Placide Hover, Vice President of HR, Latin America at Unilever. The four of them do a deep dive around the opportunities and challenges of a skills-first strategy, fostering employee growth and strengthening internal mobility.
Welcome, and thank you for joining us. I'm excited to have a conversation with Placid from Unilever, Sean from Pfizer, and Daisy from Vice Media. Our topic is skills, one of the buzziest terms in HR today. Companies constantly need new skills, but it's clear they can't solve that problem through hiring alone. LinkedIn expects member skills to change by about 40% by 2025. People are hungry for growth and development. Employees who feel their skills are not being put to good use in their current job are 10 times more likely to be looking for a new job. And Sean, that raises the question, are skills the panacea we're making them out to be?
Well, skills are certainly important, and they play a really, really important role. But I can't say with my whole heart that they're the panacea. And so I think that skill building is really critical, especially if we can identify what are the particular skills that we're trying to make manifest. But I also think that mindset is probably an equally important companion. So if we can think about skill set and mindset sort of coexisting, then I think that that gives each colleague sort of the best opportunity to sort of be successful. Well, why I say that is that like skills are important because they help us to be excellent in our role. But if you can't put that in the context of sort of why are we solving this problem, what in fact are we trying to solve or seize, then I think that we might miss the point and we might over-index on skill building and literally miss the forest for the trees.
And Placid, that brings me to the question, what are you and your team doing to help employees at Unilever develop their skills to meet the needs of this incredible global moment we're in?
Thank you, Angela, for the question, and delighted to be here. There are a few things that I would like to share with you and the audience as to what is it that we are doing as Unilever. First and foremost, learning, skilling, upskilling, reskilling, the development of our people is central to who we are and what we do and how we do business. Our future of work agenda has learning at its heart. We are investing a lot of money behind the learning and the development of our people. And that's just as an interesting data point, last year, more than 4 million times our employees went into our LMS, the learning management system. Second thing that we are doing is we're asking each one of our employees to build their future fit plan. This future fit plan is like our personal compass. We talk in that future fit plan about our skills, our career wishes, we talk about our purpose and about our well-being. And that's what we are using to navigate the learning and the development agenda within the business. Third, we have an internal mobility platform. We are calling it Flex. It's powered by artificial intelligence. And this marketplace, basically, it's all about matching skills with project and work. And it is so cool that actually our employees could contribute to projects outside their country, their function, learn something new from other people without actually the need of changing jobs.
So Placid, this idea of skills being a buzzword isn't exactly right, because it's not, just a fad. It's foundational, it sounds like. Maybe it's always been, but maybe there's a renewed awareness of just how essential it is for companies to think of learning and development as a constant as they try to navigate the future. And what I'm hearing you saying as you get into the nitty-gritty of how this is taking place at Unilever is that it's absolutely not for a segment of the employees, but really across the board. I wanted to follow up and just ask, is there a change from the idea of hiring the right people to ongoing development, or are we just renaming what has always been the case, for example, at Unilever and elsewhere?
I think we need to move from talking about roles to actually talking about skills and how a skill set can contribute to a mission that is important to the company. I think as more and more organizations are pivoting from traditional ways of organizing work, from the big matrices, functionals, organizations, and agile becoming more and more the norm, I think that there is something quite powerful and magic in terms of organizing your workforce more around skill sets and less around roles.
Daisy, we're hearing a lot about the potential of skills-first hiring as a way to reduce bias and create more equitable work opportunities for everyone. I wonder if you can define what skills-first hiring is, and then share with me your perspective on whether this is a step in the right direction. What more do we need to do to bring equity into the workplace?
I will say that skills-first hiring is really just effective hiring. That is how we should be hiring. When you think of the first things that a recruiter and a hiring manager do when they are preparing to launch a search, they are thinking about what are the capabilities that this person will need, what are the skills that this person needs, what are you trying to solve for in filling this particular role, whether it's a new role or a replacement. And skills is always the language and should always be what is part of the definition and the structure of the right hiring process. And so to me, to think about skills first hiring, I smile when you say that, because I think, well, isn't that just effective recruitment? But it does lead to more inclusive and equitable hiring practices, because it allows you to place equity at the framework of decision making. It allows you to be very clear on a structured decisioning criteria set for who you're going to hire versus the traditional bias-laden approaches that we've seen in recruitment year over year and in almost every organization I've worked for, which at the end of the day, decisions get made not necessarily based on the skills of the individuals or how skilled they may be in particular areas, but on who they are, where they've been, who they've known, who they've worked for. And so I do believe that focusing on skills, focusing on what you're trying to solve for in filling that role is what will lead you to not only bring in the right person for the organization, but also to bring in the right mix of people to your organization.
I wonder, is there any practical suggestion of how to make this real?
I'll give you a small example, which is most organizations right now are in the midst of or have been completing their internship hiring processes. And one of the processes and programs that I've put in place in several companies has been the No Friends and Family program. When you're hiring for interns, I do not want to have a list of intern candidates that come from individuals in the organization that have asked my team to recruit for them only because they know them, because they're tied to a client, because they're tied to someone that is important to the organization. We are asking them to hire these interns based on the skill sets that we have predetermined when we wrote the job descriptions and when we said, these are the individuals that we want to bring in the organizations for X, Y, and Z reason. There's no AI solution to that. There's nothing complicated to that. It simply is taking out of the equation something that was limiting your potential in the past to bring in a truly rich mix of candidates, because you're taking away these credentials and these relationships that have really nothing to do with the work that these interns will be doing.
Daisy, I love the idea, the phrase, not friends and family, internships or hiring. And when you give me that idea, I have to say, honestly, I think to myself, who are the interns that I've hired over the last 20 years? And to my chagrin, it's almost entirely friends and family, kids of people I know. And now that you point that out, I recognize how it's not only that doesn't advance equity, it really actually sustains inequity. So that's an incredibly practical tip, I think, for how to make skills-based hiring real in a workplace. I'll take you up on that suggestion immediately. I want to turn to Placid and ask a question. Perhaps that I am a researcher, that I study grit, quality of high achievers that I define as a combination of passion and perseverance for long-term goals. Placid, if you had to identify one skill you'd want all of your employees at Unilever to build, what would it be?
As I think and reflect, I'm leaning towards soft skills. And I'll give you three very quickly, not just one, but three. Number one is empathy, suspending our judgment, listening generously. And I think that if we all did this, our companies and the world would probably be a better place. Second, I would call out self-care. Reminding ourselves that our health is our wealth, that life and work are not sprints, but marathons, and that it is so important to know when we need to go up for air before we dig deep again. There is this thing that I tell myself constantly, which is all about knowing yourself, loving yourself, and giving yourself what you need. And the third one, very quickly, is coaching. As my friend Linda Grattan says, if we also became a bit better at coaching ourselves and our teams for performance, instead of overseeing tasks, the workplace would be probably also better.
Placid, this 3-item checklist, empathy, self-care, and coaching, as a psychologist, I just want to say I couldn't agree more. I wonder whether these insights in your own personal life as a high achiever are things that you've always known, or perhaps when you were a younger man that you had to learn the hard way. I wonder if you would share a little bit of your story.
There is something beautiful in your reaction to my answer, which is, I think we are unfinished products, if that makes sense. And I think life is all about putting ourselves through experiences, as I was also saying at the beginning, learning, being sponges, and allowing those experiences, those learnings to shape who we are, to help us to grow, to mature. I don't think that perfection exists, but a path to becoming a bit better as a human being has definitely somehow, some way, shaped those skills, soft skills, that I believe are necessary to succeed in the world today, as opposed to probably, as you also signaled, my own beliefs and perceptions as I was starting my career.
We're really not just talking about who we bring to our workplace, but really who we are as people. And I want to ask you, Daisy, a personal question, which is, how have you used this skill building mindset in your own career path to find fulfillment?
When I think of careers, I like to think of them as the opposite of our Instagram lives, right? Our Instagram lives seem to be these carefully curated experiences. And I don't know many people whose careers have been carefully curated. I know for sure my journey has not been, but it's been one that has been defined by, I haven't called it skill building, but it's been more around pursuing my curiosity. Pursuing my curiosity to learn something new, which in and of itself has led to expanding and deepening my skill set in various ways. All of those pivots were skill building, but really they were all my curiosity being fed and my ability to be able to not just pivot, but also use those opportunities to learn and grow, expand who I was, and really discover areas of myself that I didn't even know existed, curiosities that I didn't even know I had. But every role that I've taken, whether it was at Disney, whether it was at Time Warner, whether it was at Viacom, it was always an expansion of what I had done before. And all of that led me to the role that I have now as Chief People Officer at Vice Media. And I think that if I hadn't pursued those curiosities, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now as comprehensively and as joyfully as I get to do it.
Daisy, I can hear the joy in your voice, and I have to tell you, when people ask me, what are high achievers like? Grit sounds pretty grim, but the picture I'd like to paint is the picture of your voice and your enthusiasm. And I think curiosity has a 3-word definition: wanting to know. And I hear that as a theme, guiding you to places that you can't necessarily predict in the future, but this joyful pursuit of discoveries that you can't anticipate, but all the while becoming a better person. So Daisy, thank you for sharing your story. And Sean, I wonder, with your personal development as a leader, have there been career transformations? And if you could share a little bit of how skill building figured into your own growth.
So we have this concept at Pfizer called sort of zigzag growth. And so I'm sure that I was not the inspiration for it, but I have sort of made it my journey. And so I moved around quite a bit in my career. And then each time sort of the move was either driven by a curiosity or a desire to sort of broaden my skill set or to apply it differently. And so I've literally sort of been lots of different things: a banker, a marketer, a strategist, and now I'm leading learning at Pfizer. And so in each of those cases, it's really been around sort of, what am I curious about? What am I seeking to learn? How can I make a different type of contribution? And many times the foundation of that experience has been around either acquiring new skills or applying a set of skills that I already have to either see if we can't make a difference in a particular area or opportunity.
Terrific conversation today, and I want to end with this. Sometimes when we talk about the broad concept of skills, it's easy to forget the kind of impact we have on individuals. And I wonder, for each of you, can you share an employee growth story that continues to stick with you to this day?
Yeah, so I think a lot of times we think about the relationship between manager and colleague, but I think that some of the richer stories actually even come from peer-to-peer learning. There was once a situation where a colleague was particularly frustrated by they felt like that they had the right skills and they weren't being considered for the opportunity that they thought that they were actually already over-indexing for. But it was through engaging with another peer that they had the opportunity to look through the different lens and sort of figure out, well, it wasn't just about the skills that they had, it was about sort of how they were choosing to present themselves. And so I think that there's learning and growth in those types of opportunities where we allow ourselves to be vulnerable, we allow peers to give us guidance and support, and ultimately it helps to make us better.
Oh goodness, Angela, those are the stories that bring me the most joy. I think often of the quote that I believe is Maya Angelou's of, people will forget what you said, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. And my intent is always to ensure that everyone who works with me, who partners with me, who engages with me, leaves a conversation, leaves a moment with me feeling lighter, feeling better about themselves, feeling pushed to think differently. And so I always tell my team, I will always push you to the place of discomfort, but I will always be there to hold you so you don't fall. And that I think allows individuals to believe that you have their back, that you're supporting them, but it gives them the freedom to experiment, to try, to test, and to really push themselves out of their comfort zone so that they can grow.
Sean, Daisy, Placid, thank you so much for this conversation on skills. Not a buzzword, maybe a theme for how workplaces of the future can continue to get the best out of employees, but also how employees can get the most out of work and out of life. Skills are about joy, about curiosity, about lifelong learning and improvement. Skills are about trust, and skills are something that we have to put equity at the center of when we think about what we really want for work in the future. Thank you for this conversation. I look forward to another one.
Thank you, Angela, and guests. I want to broaden the lens even more and invite Mary Fitzpatrick, Global Head of Diversity and Inclusion at Rolls-Royce UK, one of the most well-known luxury brands in the world. She's joining us from her home in Newbury, England. Mary, welcome.
Thank you. Hello.
So, Mary, you've heard what our guests had to say about the importance of skills in the workplace. What's your experience been?
I think skills are really important, but I think it's also really vital that we remember that skills don't always play differently from person to person. So it's important when you go into interview and you have your list of skills that you're really generous with how that person is going to display those skills to you.
Well, what skills do organizations and employees need to build in order to create more equitable and inclusive workplaces?
I'm going to hark back to one of your previous speakers. I think empathy is absolutely vital, and that is something that I'm always looking for. Somebody who I know will come into the business and be prepared to look behind them, to bring others up, and to be generous of spirit. You know, you can have someone who's incredibly skilled, but they can just be the most terrible person. So you don't want that. So you have to really, at interview, deep dive into that one person's personality to understand how they would demonstrate their skills when they're working within your company.
Mary, can you tell us about a program you have at Rolls-Royce called Connect and Belong that pairs mentors with mentees to build new skills?
Of course. This program came about following the murder of George Floyd, when we listened to our Black employees and they said very clearly, we feel that you're not listening, we feel disenfranchised, we feel invisible. So we put together a program that was really skills-based. It was about giving people the opportunity to understand what skills they had and how they could grow them. And we have lots and lots of different speakers who've come into the program and worked with them. So it's been massively successful.
Mary, what is your advice to HR professionals who are looking to build a more inclusive and equitable workplace?
I think they need to take it seriously. Everybody's incredibly good at saying, yes, we have a diversity and inclusion strategy, but then popping it in a drawer. I think the thing is you need to take it out of the drawer, dust it off, and look at the really key points, and then measure it so that you can say, you know, we've got, of the hires that we made, 25% were female. We're going to increase that. You need to have lots of data points that you can push forward to take it seriously, and also be transparent. Share it with your employees so they understand and feel proud of the activities that the company they're working for are involved in.
Mary Fitzpatrick of Rolls-Royce, thank you.
Thank you.
Over the last 2 years, software company Atlassian has continued its aggressive growth by relying on its strategy of building skills and supporting internal mobility. Global Head of Talent Acquisition, Andy Mountney, explains.
Atlassian make collaborative software tools, and globally we're a team of over 7,000 people in 13 countries. Atlassian's internal mobility strategy is really evolving at the moment. We're really seeing people make a choice about a lateral career move rather than necessarily a linear one upwards through a management chain. What does that mean? It's about acquiring new skills and building that portfolio.
I think Atlassian really prides itself on trying to stretch and grow all of their talent, not just in one function, but across a range of different skill sets. I actually started as an intern in 2016 after graduating with a Bachelor of Arts and Law degree, which is quite unconventional.
So when you think about the opportunity for an engineer who's worked on a product for all their career, they can now go and work on a platform and gain completely different experience at scale. Or someone might choose to work in a completely different craft. What you're seeing now is people really choosing digital learning experiences on their own time, on platforms like LinkedIn Learning, and on the things that are going to help them, rather than just acquiring generic skills and certificates. That's a great opportunity for people who are then looking to change careers or develop within an organization to show up with part of the skill that maybe they're trying to develop and an understanding of it.
Then I returned to Atlassian as an associate product manager before relocating to Mountain View to work on the enterprise team.
There are 3 clear reasons for us in having an internal mobility strategy. Firstly, you build connectivity between teams and individuals to the organization. Secondly, you can base it in your values, create psychological safety while people try new things. And finally, it's that opportunity to grow.
The headline is that in 2016, I was a product management intern at Atlassian, and now I am the comms lead for our Chief Operating Officer.
One of the great benefits for Atlassian in seeing people move their careers internally is that obviously we get to retain amazing people and continue their career journeys with us rather than losing them to new opportunities with other employers.
Internal mobility for the win.
We appreciate your time and value your opinion, so please take a few minutes to fill out our forward survey. You can access it with either the QR code you see or by clicking the link in the chat. It's the best way we know how to make this show even better next time. I'm happy to welcome 2 well-respected voices to share their expertise and insights. I'm also interested in what they're hearing from other HR professionals about the future of work at both a macro and micro level. Twila Hansen is LinkedIn's Chief People Officer, joining us from the company's San Francisco office. And here in the studio with me is Noelle Fakori, Director of Employee Experience. Welcome to you both.
Thank you, Guy. Thanks so much for having us. It's been a blast so far.
Twila, I want to start with you.
It's wonderful to be here.
I want to start with you. What are you talking about with other people leaders? What are they telling you?
First, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention how wonderful it is to be part of an HR community of leaders where we could just pick up the phone, make time for each other, and help navigate this new world of work. It's quite special to be able to have resources at your disposal like that. I think what's really top of mind is in regards to what is the future of work? How do we operate? What's next? How do we think about really leaning into flexibility and meeting employees where they are? I think another theme that's coming up loud and clear is around intentional culture. How do you make sure that you're maintaining your culture in the new environment? A third area is in regards to the competitive landscape. How do you ensure that you are making the right investments in your current workforce so they could navigate career mobility?
Noelle, what are some of the most important things you can do to foster a sense of belonging?
I love that question. And Twila and all of our HR teams, we talk about belonging a lot because everybody has a role to play here. And really, when we think about belonging, it's that opportunity to really take small acts that build trust over time. And there's lots of different ways that this can be done. For example, for people managers, we should deliberately be thinking about how do we leverage our one-on-ones on a regular basis to actually figure out what do people need and then how do we flex our style to deliver on that. Whereas at a teammate or even a peer level, there are lots of ways to show that I'm paying attention to you, I care about you. So maybe it's asking on a regular basis, hey, how are you really doing? Or giving somebody a pep talk before that next presentation you know that they have coming up, or even congratulating somebody when they start to step out of their comfort zone. Those small signals, they add up to a short-term and most importantly, a long-term culture of belonging.
Twila, tell us a little bit about LinkedIn's flex work policy and how did you land on that policy?
Yeah, so our flex work policy is really rooted on trust. So similar to what Noelle was mentioning, the engagement between managers and employees is really important. And if there's trust, if there's psychological safety, if you're able to engage in dialogue, you could really understand what it is that your employees need and where they do their best work. So our policy is really focused on where our employees do their best work, what works best for them. Does it make sense for them to come into the office? Or does it make sense for them sometimes to work remotely and work from home? So we provide that flexibility, really asking our employees and managers to have a really good dialogue, great conversations around where employees could do their best. And we got there by listening, by reviewing employee surveys, by having focus groups, by really making sure that we understood how employees were feeling and how we could meet them where they were.
Noelle, do you have any tips for how to build culture in a remote and hybrid work environment?
Yeah, so Twila says this a lot, but when we think about culture, culture should live in every stage of the employee life cycle. So regardless of where you're actually doing work, whether you're at home or in the office, just like Twila was mentioning, you should experience it, period. And the way that you make sure that you're building it into your company's DNA is by building that consistent drumbeat around culture. So for example, in your team meetings, think about how are you creating rituals that create a team culture? In larger environments like a company all hands, how can you make sure you're finding ways to call out that is what culture looks like in action? And then even when you think about what you could be doing in performance conversations or just day-to-day one-on-ones or when you ask for feedback, there's a way to start to call out, you were living our values at this moment. So it becomes clear, it becomes concise, and it becomes a shared experience.
And Noelle, what is LinkedIn doing right now when it comes to focusing on employee experiences?
So we heard from Nina earlier about the Lift Up Wellbeing program, and well-being is going to continue to be a huge focus for LinkedIn. But in addition to that, something I'm really excited about is that in 2022, we're focusing on the spirit of reconnection. So how can we bring employees together to connect around our company, around our culture, even just connect with one another? So we'll actually be launching a series of brand new programs and activations that really help our company and our employees align around our vision and our mission and what we do. Really get energized about our culture and our values and what makes LinkedIn special. But of course, we got to make it fun, throw in some surprise and delights. So we'll be trying to bring that spontaneity back to the sense of work as well.
And Twila, do you think that hybrid work environments, where some people go into the office, some people work from home, might create some inequities in the workplace?
Yes, I think if you're not intentional about equitable work experiences, you could find that. I think it's really important that you're monitoring and you're measuring everything from how you're recruiting, who's successful in an interview. If you're looking at people who are coming in, measuring the success of folks who are coming in to interview versus those who are interviewing virtually, all the way through the employee life cycle. We're fortunate at LinkedIn, we have a vice president of flex work and her team, and they're monitoring and measuring that experience so that we could understand where we could really make sure that we're seeing equitable outcomes through promotions, through stretch work assignments. We're also really excited to continue to work with our remote employee resource group so we could continue to understand what their experience is and where they may feel like they haven't had the opportunity to interact and engage with the LinkedIn culture in the way that we would like them to.
Twila, thank you.
You're welcome.
And Noelle, thank you.
Such a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much, Guy.
It's hard to believe that 60 minutes have passed this quickly, but this is not the end of the conversation. It's only the beginning. Collectively, we're just starting to scratch the surface on these topics, and we want to keep the conversation going. So use hashtag LinkedInForward to post your thoughts, comments, and questions, and we'll be on the lookout for them. And please, if you have a few minutes, fill out our Forward survey to let us know how we can make Forward even better next time. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Guy Raz. Let's go forward together.